Right, I just want to go back to the book of Joshua and chapter 24. So I really just want to look at something, expand something that I touched on a few weeks ago. And it's really the first verse of the chapter. Joshua chapter 24 and verse 1. Remember, we read it a few weeks ago. And Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel and for their heads and for their judges and for their officers. And it's this little expression at the end of the verse. And they presented themselves before God. Now, I've been back there in the last few days. At the end of this month, I'm going to cross to Northern Ireland for a weekend. And it's a young people's weekend. And I've been asked to speak on the subject of young lives yielded to God. Young lives yielded to God. Or young lives presented to God. And I've really just been thinking over these past days about this amazing statement here at the end of chapter 24 and verse 1 of Joshua. And the whole people, all the tribes of Israel, they came to Shechem at the commandment of Joshua, that together they might present themselves before God. It's interesting as well that they do so under the commandment of Joshua. But I was looking the other night there at an experience in the life of Moses when he was commanded by God to present himself before. In Exodus chapter 34 and verse 2, remember that Moses has already been on the mount and he's already been communing with God, and he receives the tables of stone with the 10 commandments, and he comes down and he smashes them as he sees the people worshipping the golden calf. And then God speaks to him and he says, Moses, he says, be ready in the morning and come up in the morning unto Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me in the top of the mount, summoned by God into his presence to stand before him. I don't know how Moses felt that night. Or he'd been there before, he'd known and experienced it, but now he's being summoned to stand before God. There's a sense in which there's coming a day when all men will be summoned to stand. Stand before God in all his awesomeness and his glory and his holiness. Every man standing before God, commanded to stand there, to be searched by his all-searching eye. But we are able voluntary. The people in Israel in Joshua's day, they were commanded by Joshua. Moses was commanded by the Lord. But we have the opportunity voluntary just to come and to present ourselves in the presence of the Lord. I just wonder, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago, when we gather together, is it just, do we just meet? Is it just a meeting? Is it just something that we always do on a Sunday and we do on a Tuesday night and we do on other occasions? Is it just a meeting? Or do we really come consciously to present ourselves and to wait in the presence of God? And what about in our own private lives? In our own quiet times? And Christians this afternoon, it is vital that we have quiet times. We're living in a noisy world. We're living in a demanding world. We're living in a world when there is so much that is clamoring for our attention, screaming out at us. And we need to get away from all that. And we need to spend time in prayer. We need to spend time in the Word. We need to spend time with God. But even our quiet times, or whatever you want to call them, even they can just become a habit. Even they can become just a routine, just a duty that we feel that as Christians we've got to fulfill. But just to set that time aside and just to come into the presence of God and present ourselves there and wait there in the presence of the Lord. Presenting ourselves before the Lord, it should be a habitual thing, but it shouldn't be a habit. It shouldn't be something that we just do. It's something we should do all the time, but it's not something that we should just do. We should be aware of the tremendous honor and the privilege, and yet the tremendous responsibility of coming into the presence of God. You think of the priest in the Day of Atonement, the high priest. He never entered into the holiest of all casually. He never sort of looked at his calendar one day and said, "Oh, by the way, tomorrow's the Day of Atonement, and I'll be getting into the sanctuary." It was something he anticipated. It was something that he was looking forward. It was something that he was preparing for. It was something that would fill his heart with a sense of dread. When the day came when he would go through the camp of the Israelites and he would go into the courtyard of the tabernacle and he would go into the holy place and he would come to the veil. Beyond the veil, the King of glory, the manifest presence of God. And he knew that. He would pull the veil aside. He would step in. A sense of awe and wonder. Brothers and sisters, have we lost all that? We lost all that. Sometimes our Christianity has got more to do with the head than it has to do with the heart. It's got more to do with the things that we know rather than things we experience. The presence, the manifest presence of God. We're glad, aren't we, that the veil has been rent. We don't need to pull aside a veil to step in. The veil no longer exists. The veil has been rent from the top to the bottom. The way in is available. But that shouldn't lessen our sense of excitement, our sense of anticipation, our sense of awe of being able to come before God. That's really why we meet. Our gatherings are not social gatherings, although there's a social aspect of it, and that's good, and fellowship with one another is vital. But we meet together to meet with him. To come beyond the veil into his presence. To wait there, linger there. Just enjoy the presence of the Lord. We can come boldly. The scriptures tell us that. The writer to the Hebrews, come boldly. We must always come reverently. Reverently. With a real deep sense of who we're approaching. We're approaching the Almighty, holy, holy God. Oh, if we've lost the awesomeness of that, oh, that we might recapture that even this afternoon. And the excitement and the awesomeness of just coming into the presence of God. I mentioned a few weeks ago that, sometimes we're presented to someone with a view to being introduced to that person. And I thought particularly the idea of people being introduced to a late monarch. And we can all think of the images in our mind over the years when we have seen various individuals, dignitaries, other kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers, and they come and they have an audience with the Queen and they are introduced to her. But we've thought about just the ordinary people. Just the people from everyday life that have been nominated for an award from the Queen, and there comes that day when they visit either the palace or Holyrood House in Edinburgh. And they're going to have an audience with the Queen, now the King. You can imagine how these people feel. Even the Prime Minister and even these other monarchs. The comments that were being made just a few weeks ago at the passing of our late Queen, and people said, even other monarchs in Europe were saying there was just something about her. There was an awe about her. She was respected, she was honoured, and it was a privilege to be introduced to her. Brothers and sisters, we have the privilege, we have the honour of coming before the King of all kings, the Lord of heaven and earth, the God of eternity, the Creator. And able to come into his presence and we're introduced to him, to have a conversation with him. Oh, that we might never lose the excitement of that, the wonder of that. You think of people who have been nominated for OBEs and MBEs, just ordinary people from our communities. And yet they're taken from their own environment. They're taken down to London, to Buckingham Palace, and into the anteroom. And there comes a moment when the door is open and they're let in to be introduced to the monarch. That's an experience that people will never forget. Never forget. And we never want to forget. The highlight of their life. Yet, brothers and sisters, we have that privilege, a greater privilege, every day of our life. Just coming reverently, boldly, just to be introduced afresh. I was thinking of the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of the South. Remember, she had heard about Solomon and all his glory. There came a day when she had an introduction to him. There was a day when she presented herself in the presence of Solomon. She was a queen. She had her own wealth, she had her own courtiers, she had her own palaces, she had it all. But there came a moment when she was introduced to the king, Solomon, and all his wisdom and his wealth and his glory. And she saw the orderliness of his household, and she saw the fare that was on his table. And she listened to his wisdom and she saw his wealth. And she says, the half has not been told. Anything I ever heard about kind of pales into insignificance in the light of what I've seen and heard with my own eyes. And the introduction, as it is described for us in 2 Chronicles, chapter number 9, it says there was no spirit left in her. She was awestruck. She was speechless in his presence. Brothers and sisters, that's our privilege. Just to come into the presence of God. Just to behold his majesty, and his glory, and his wealth, and his wisdom, and the orderliness, the sovereignty of all his movements throughout the ages. And just to be blown away to be speechless in his presence. You know, sometimes there's more value in silent worship than there is in spoken worship. Just awestruck in the presence of majesty. You know, as I mentioned just in prayer at the end of the meeting this morning, just a wee thought that came into my mind. You know, we don't come before the Lord as groveling sinners seeking mercy, but we come as glorified saints just to gaze at majesty. What a privilege. What an honor. You know, I was thinking as well that I was thinking of that wee verse in Malachi 3. And the Lord's speaking to Israel, but he says, you know, he says, you are my jewels. Talks about a day when he'll make up his jewels. The idea is when he presents them. Brothers and sisters, we're part of the crown jewels. We're part of the crown jewels. You know, the crown jewels of our monarchy are priceless, priceless. We're priceless. And the privileges that we have as being part of the peculiar treasure of God, his peculiar people, his precious people, his treasured people. The privilege that we have is beyond calculation. You know, these crown jewels, they only come out in special occasions. We all know they're there, but they're only manifest in special occasions. The Lord has got his crown jewels. We are his jewels. We are his treasured possession, and there's coming a day when we're going to be manifest. We're going to be shown forth for who we are to the whole world. And as he comes in glory, then we will come with him, and we will be displayed with him in glory. Brothers and sisters, these are the privileges that we've been brought in by wonderful grace. You know, there are very few people that are allowed to handle the crown jewels. Very few. There's the crown jewel there. And there's, I think, the Archbishop of Canterbury or something. And you know, isn't it true that Paul says about us? He says, you know, he says, there's no one can lay anything in your chaps. Nobody can touch you. Nobody can touch you. We're set apart, we're kept, we're sanctified for the Lord. We're not only sanctified, but you know, we are glorified. Right now, we are glorified. That's what Paul tells us in Romans 8. He says, those he predestinated, he called, and those he called, he justified, and those he justified, he sanctified, and those he sanctified, he glorified, he also glorified. Not in a day to come, but here and now. Here and now. Don't you be ashamed of being a Christian. Don't you be ashamed of being a child of God. Something that we should be, for use of a better word, it's something that we should be proud of. It's certainly something that we should delight in. And the privileges that come with it, the privilege of coming into the presence of God. Just to be introduced to him. Just to learn of him. Just to learn who he is. And all his majesty, splendor, and glory, and love, and compassion. Just to learn the very heart, nature of our God. Oswald Chambers said, he said, you know, we have become so self-centered that we only go to God for something from him, rather than going into his presence for him himself. Is that not true? We spend a lot more time asking God for things than just spending time awestruck in his presence, worshipping and adoring him. You know, the highest place that a Christian could ever occupy is at the feet of God. It's at the feet of God. That's the highest place that we could ever enjoy. Just worshipping at the feet of Jesus. And finding that in his presence, like the psalmist tells us, there is fullness of joy. Mary understood that, didn't she? Mary of Bethany. She understood the value of being found at the feet of Jesus. And Martha's running about, serving him. And Mary's just sitting, worshipping him, just enjoying him for who he is, enjoying his company. Brothers and sisters, that's our privilege. Just to present ourselves before God in order that we might learn him. That our minds might just be taken up with his glory. I thought as well, and I mentioned it a few weeks ago, I thought of the idea of just coming before the Lord to be inspected by him. To be looked at, to be examined by him. Now, I thought of the idea of the parade ground and the soldiers on the parade ground. They're there to be examined. They're there to be inspected. Some of us watched the video of Zach, one of our grandsons, just a few months ago when he his passing out parade. And they were marched onto the parade ground. They'd done that many times before. They had spent months practicing that. And for months they had been looked up and down by their drill sergeant. But you know, this day was different. This day was different. They weren't presenting themselves before the drill sergeant. They were presenting themselves before the company commander. That just put an extra edge in the whole thing. That put an extra burden on the whole thing. That day, they were standing in the presence of the commander to be examined, to be looked at from head to toe, looked at from the berry to the boot, or in Zach's case, being a member of the Scots Guard and other Guard regiments, from the bearskin to the boots, from top to toe. You know, the berry's got to be at the right angle, the bearskin has got to be, the strap has got to be at the right part of the chin. The boots have got to be polished so you can see your face in them, and the buttons have got to be polished so that you can see your face in them. And the rifle's got to be held at the right angle. You've got to stand upright in the presence of the commander to be examined. That's where David was, wasn't it? In Psalm 139. It's interesting, at the beginning of the chapter, he says, "You have searched me." But at the end of the chapter, he says, "God, search me, look at me, examine me." So we come into the presence of the Lord, not just to be introduced to him, but to be inspected by him. Just to say, "Search me, oh God, search me. Look me up and down. Look me inside out." Because God's not so much interested in externals. God's interested in the heart. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks in the heart. David knew that. He says, "Try me, try the very ways of my heart. Expose everything in me that grieves you." Because the burden of the psalmist's heart was that he might please his master, please his God. Know that we might come into the presence of the Lord, not just that we might worship him and adore him, but in order that we might be inspected by him, searched by him, looked up and down. You know, as we watched that video of Zach's passing out parade, it didn't just happen in a few minutes. It took a long while. As the company commander went from row to row and from soldier to soldier. And they stood there, ramrod straight, waiting for that moment when they would be singled out for inspection. Or that we might just come before the Lord with that attitude of heart, just desiring that anything that is contrary to what he would desire for our lives, that it might be exposed, that it might be dealt with, and that we might present ourselves in a manner that would be acceptable to him, that he might be delighted in us, that we might be worthy of him. You know, that's really what the parades are as far as the soldiers are concerned. They're showing to the commanding officer that we are worthy of this regiment. We are worthy of the status that we have in the army. We represent the army. We want to show that in our demeanour. So they present themselves for inspection. Know that we might be like that. And that we might present ourselves before the Lord, because it might be the desire of our hearts that we might walk worthy of God. That we would live our lives in a manner that would honour him, please him. But I thought as well, not only being presented for an introduction or presented for an inspection, but I thought about being presented for instruction. Not so much the idea of learning and the idea of being looked at, being examined, but the idea of listening. Coming before God, listening with an open ear, listening, an open heart. Coming before the Lord as a servant to the master. I was thinking of Samuel. You know, Samuel's a remarkable kid. He was just a kid. He was just a child. Away from home, away from his parents. Living in an environment that was hostile. I know the desire in his mother's heart was that he might be devoted to the Lord. That's what she prayed for. That's what she vowed. That's what she'd promised. The moment he was weaned, she took him up to Jerusalem to leave him, to Shiloh to leave him in the tabernacle to be a servant of God. You might have thought, well, that was a safe place to be. Well, it wasn't really. Because old Eli, the high priest, he was dim, and he was dim in his eyes and dim in his spirit. His sons were rascals. And young Samuel's in the midst of all that. And hears a voice one night, Samuel, Samuel. What was his response? Here I am. Here I am. He didn't realize it was the Lord, but he had a servant heart. He had a submissive spirit, and whenever he heard the call, he says, here am I, ready to respond. I wonder, are we ready to respond when the Lord speaks? The Lord speaks in the quiet times that we spend with him, when he speaks in the gatherings of his people. Are we just ready to respond? Here am I. Of course, he goes to Eli because he thought it was Eli. And Eli says, you must be imagining things. You're way back in sleep. And he heard the voice again in the same scenario, and again in the same scenario. And then it suddenly dawned on dim Eli. Samuel, it's the Lord that's speaking. He went back to his bed again, and he heard the voice, Samuel, Samuel. You know, isn't it wonderful that we've not only got a God, but we've got a personal God. A God who knows our names. A God who knows the circumstances of our life. A God who's got a plan for our lives. He says, Samuel, Samuel. The cry comes through the darkness. And Samuel says, speak, Lord. Speak, Lord. Speak, Lord. Thy servant hears. Just a young lad. And is that how we come? Is that how we've gathered this afternoon? Oh, it's 2:30. It's time for the meeting today. I better go. I'll get criticised if I'm not there. But I wonder if we come into the presence of the Lord just to say, speak, Lord. And I'm listening, just to present ourselves, just like we Samuel presented himself with the Lord. Here I am, I'm here, just to hear. Just to listen to the voice of the Lord. You know, the task that he was given wasn't an easy task. God had already pronounced judgment on Eli and his sons, and he's going to confirm it. He's going to confirm it through the lips of a young boy. You know, we talked this morning, about the value of children, God. Children whose lives are just yielded to the Lord. It's incalculable what God can do through a child that's yielded to him and listening to him. Samuel just presented himself. Just as I'm available, Lord. I'm available. I wonder, is that where we are in our lives? Just available to the Lord, just yielded to him. Just surrendered. Remember Romans 12 and 1, where Paul says, I beseech you that you present your bodies. Present your bodies. Living sacrifice. Giving yourself over to him. Just ready to do what he asks you to do every moment of every day, as the songwriter says. Just to be a volunteer. Just to willingly yield your life to God and his service. No, only you can choose to be a volunteer. Nobody can choose you to be a volunteer. Nobody can coerce you to be a volunteer. Only you can make yourself a volunteer for God. That's one of the big differences, if you listen to the media anyway, that's one of the big differences in the war in Ukraine at this time. The difference between the Ukrainian army and the Russian army. The Ukrainian army is full of volunteers. People that prepare to die for their land, for their country, for their principles. Whereas the Russians, many of them are conscripts. They've just been forced in it. And whereas the volunteers of the Ukrainian army, they're ready to lay down their lives. And their morale is high because they're fighting for a cause. The Russian soldiers are ready to flee for their lives and give up. And their morale is low because they don't see a cause that's worthy to fight for. Young brothers and sisters, all of us, there's a cause that is worthy to fight for. There's an army that is worth enlisting in. God's not looking for conscripts, people that are forced. He's looking for volunteers, like Samuel, that will just yield themselves to God for his service. Just a couple of weeks ago, Brother Andrew passed away. I learned about Brother Andrew when I was just a teenager. I used to read biographies and autobiographies. of men and women that had given themselves to God and to God's service. I would encourage you young folks this afternoon. Go to a Christian bookshop, or if you can get them online. Buy or start reading the biographies of men and women of God who served God, who lived for God, who died for God, and be inspired by them. Brother Andrew was a Dutchman. He was injured while fighting for the Dutch army in the Dutch East Indies, which is now modern day Indonesia. He was sent back home to recuperate and rehabilitate. And one day he spent most of the day earnestly praying for God to reveal God's plan for his life. And he cried out, he says, "What is it, Lord? What is it? What am I holding back? What am I using as an excuse for not serving you in whatever way you want me to?" And he says, and then there by the side of the canal, I finally had my answer. My yes to God had always been a yes, but. A yes, but. Yes, but I'm not educated. Yes, but I'm lame. The injury that he received in Indonesia affected him for the rest of his life. So he was saying yes to God, but there was a but. And the but was the hindrance to total, absolute, willing surrender. Maybe that's where you are tonight. And you're saying yes to God, but there's a but there. But I'm too young. But I want to accomplish this in my life first. Or I need to sort this out in my life first. And there's a but. And that but is the hindrance to you serving God, you pleasing God, you going on for God. Brother Andrew said, with the next breath, I did say yes. But I said it in a brand new way, without qualification. I said, I'll go, Lord. And I'll begin this very minute. Lord, as I stand up from this place and as I take my first step forward, will you consider that this is a step towards complete obedience to you? And he says, I'll call it the step of yes. The step of yes. Have you taken a step of yes in your life? A step of absolute surrender, of complete obedience. Saying, yes, Lord, I'll follow you. I'll do what you ask me to do. I'll live my life for you. I'll give my life for you, if necessary. He committed his life to God by saying, whenever, wherever, however you want me, I'll go and I'll begin this minute. Brothers and sisters, that could transform your life this afternoon. Died at 94 years of age, just a few weeks ago. Spent his life in service for God, proved God, the faithfulness of God. God took him to Eastern Europe. I was going to say the book that he wrote was God's Smuggler, but he wasn't really a smuggler. Smugglers take things in kind of surreptitiously. Like he took stuff in just in full sight. He had an old blue Volkswagen that he filled up with Bibles and Christian literature and travelled the whole of Eastern Europe, Poland and Romania and Bulgaria and Eastern Germany and Yugoslavia and up into Russia itself and ultimately to China and then to the Middle East. You know, we used to pray. He prayed the first time as he reached the first communist border that ever crossed. He says, God, you're the God that is able to make blind eyes see. I'm praying that you make seeing eyes blind. The customs officers came and opened his car, and the Bibles were lying there, and they shut the door and they shut the boot and let him go. For 70 years. For 70 years. He and his companions transported 1 million Bibles in one night to the shores of China, communist China. And a special barge built in the Philippines, filled it with Bibles, sailed it across to the shores of China. It arranged for a group of believers to be waiting at a certain time, at a certain point. And they unloaded the Bibles onto rafts, and they pulled them ashore with ropes. 1 million Bibles dispatched and disembarked in 2 hours. It took the Christians 5 years to distribute them through China. God preserve them. God bless. Why? Because you took a step of yes. You took a step of yes. That's what God's looking for, you young folks. God's looking for a step of yes. In fact, every day he's looking for a step of yes from every one of us. Just say, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Whatever you want. Wherever you want me to go, however you want me to serve, I'm ready, I'm willing, I'm a volunteer. I present myself to you as a servant whose ear is open to your voice. C.T. Studd said. C.T. Studd was a son in one of the wealthiest families in England. He was a well-known international cricketer. And God broke into his life. He became a Christian. He gave away everything he had. And he set sail, ultimately for Africa. And this is his words. If Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice can be too big for me to make for him. Oh, that we would grasp that. Jesus Christ is God. Jesus Christ did die for me. And in the light of that, no sacrifice could be too big for me to make for him. He calls people to leave their homes. He calls people to give away their money. He tells people to give up on a career or a relationship. And you see, that's tough. Calvary was tough. Calvary was torment. Jesus Christ was prepared to endure that for you and me. And that's why Paul says, I beseech you therefore, in the light of the mercies of God, what God has done, to give our lives as living sacrifice. Yeah. Jim Elliot, a young man, along with 4 companions, laid down their lives on the shores of a river in Ecuador. Years before, Elliot had penned these words: he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. We cannot hold on to our lives. We cannot elongate our lives for a split second. It's finite. Elliot knew that. As a young man who'd been laid hold on by God, he knew that. His life was really not his own. He presented himself to the Lord, listening, that he might be instructed for service. And he laid down that which he could not keep in order that he might gain that which he cannot lose. You see, he was living in the light of this world down here, and all that he could have and all that he could enjoy down here. He was living in the light of the world up there. He was living in the light of eternity and all that he could experience up there. And just to hear the words of the Master, well done, good and faithful servant, enter in to the joy of your rest. Remember Saul of Tarsus? Just a baby Christian. Just out the womb, as it were. What does he say? He says, Lord, what do you want me to do? He presents himself before the Lord. And he says, Lord, what do you want me to do? And he just laid his life in the hands of the God that revealed himself to him. I wonder, are you there? Am I there? Just yielded and available to God. I remember as a young teenager, late teens, still at university, working in a building site during the summer. A number of Christians on the building site, and one of them said to me one day, he says, Ian, he says, do you ever think God's calling you to be a missionary? He says, do you ever think of being a missionary? And I says, I've never heard the call of God. He said these words to me, Ian, he says, is your ear open to the call of God? He says, if God called, would you hear? That challenged me as a young lad. I just sought the rest of my life just to live with a consciousness of listening to the voice of the Lord, what the Lord wanted for my life. Not what I wanted to do in my life, but what the Lord wanted to do in my life and through my life for his glory. I wonder this afternoon, are we listening? Are we listening? Are we learning of him? Are we presenting ourselves to be looked at by him, to be searched by him? Do we present ourselves in his presence that we might listen to his voice? I thought of Daniel in chapter 9, 18 to 21. Daniel comes before the Lord in intercession. Things are bad. Things are bad in the land. Things are bad in the city. Things are bad in the nation. And he comes to present his petitions. He comes to offer his intercession before God. He's got longings in his heart. Longings for recovery, longings for revival, longings for his people, for his nation. And he comes and he presents his petitions before God. Longings. I wonder, do we come before God with longings, yearnings? And we think of the state of our land. And we think of the state of our own families at times. We think of the state of our own fellowships. We come before the Lord with intercession, plead our case before him, and plead, yearn and long that God would step in, that God would recover, he would revive, he would restore, he would work for his glory. Our nation, our world needs intercession. We need people that will lay hold on God. People that know God and lay hold on God. Not just people that will say prayers. The people will offer petitions with longings in their hearts, and burdens in their hearts before God. But I thought as well, I thought of the idea not only of instruction, an introduction and intercession, but I thought of the idea of intimacy. Thought of the idea of loving. I was thinking of that. I was thinking of the picture of the bride when she's presented to her bridegroom. There's going to be a wedding in this hall next year, early next year. And the bride is going to be walked down this aisle with a shoomer, her father. But when they get to the front of the hall, then the father is going to take a step to the side and he's going to present his bride, his daughter, to be a young man's bride and ultimately a young man's wife. And that's a most sacred moment. a most special moment when someone is presented as a bride to a bridegroom. And the thing that envelops that whole scenario is love, intimate love. I thought of Rebecca. Remember, the father Abraham had sent his servants to get a bride for his son Isaac, his only Isaac. And he goes and he searches and he finds her and he brings her back. He asks her a question. Or the family asks her a question. Will you go with this man? And she says, I'll go, I'll go, I'll go. And I'm sure, there was a sense of anxiety and trepidation as she made the journey with the servant, and yet a sense of excitement, because there was coming a moment when she was going to be introduced to the man that she would spend the rest of her life with. The man that would be her husband. The man that she would enjoy intimate love with. And when they came near, she saw him out in front of his tent, and she alighted from her camel and she put her veil on him. And the servant walked her up to Isaac, presented her to him. And it says that he took her into his mother's tent and she became his wife. What a beautiful presentation. A bridegroom presented to a bridegroom that they might enjoy mutual love forever. Brothers and sisters, we come before the Lord not just to learn and not just to be looked at and not just to listen and not just to long in prayer, to yearn in prayer, but we come in order to love and be loved. We come to enjoy that intimate relationship with the Lord Jesus. There's coming a day when he is going to actually present himself to himself. Going to present his church to himself. Ephesians chapter 5 tells us that he's going to present his bride to himself. It's a glorious church without spot or wrinkle or any such thing. That was the burden of Paul in his ministry. So he writes in 2 Corinthians 11 that his desire was that he may present the church as a chaste virgin to Christ. Brothers and sisters, these are the hard things of Christianity. And that should be the burden of every teacher of the word, every elder, every preacher of the gospel, every saint, that the whole church might be presented as a chaste virgin to Christ. That the church might be satisfied in him, and that he might be satisfied in